Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to yet another edition of Take 3, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Anand Narsimhan, and with me, as always, Managing Editor, CNN News 18, Zaka Jacob, and Consulting Editor, News 18 Network, Rahul Shivshankar.
The usual suspects.
Yes, the usual suspects, and we just have some fun, boys. But this time around, the issue at hand is very serious, but it's also a moment of, let's say, collar up for us as Bharat, as a people, as Indians. The reason why, because if there is one global leader who can sit across the alley on either sides of this entire block which is there between the Russia-China block, or if you look at the America-led NATO bloc, or he can go and hug a Volodymyr Zelensky while give a bear hug to Vladimir Putin, it's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Bharat is at the epicenter of this entire global geopolitics somehow, and they are there, welcome on the high table. The other part is this entire BRICS summit. If you look at the BRICS combined today, their GDP is greater than the G7 nations. Now, what does all of this mean, especially with this Thaw in equations between Bharat and China, this pullback at LAC? There is lots and layers within layers. Let's look at the US elections that are going to happen. Which way is that going to roll? What's happening with the Five Eyes and Trudeau and what that means? Kiski dosti bhali, kiski dushmani bhali. You know, a lot of things to talk about. So let's just dive in. Zaka Jacob, let's start with you.
I'll start with the China part because I think that's the substantive one out of BRICS, at least from an India point of view. And I think it's, kudos to the diplomats, the generals, because there have been multiple rounds of negotiations for the last 4 years. There have been 31 rounds of the WMCC, there have been 21 rounds of the Corps Commanders, multiple meetings between the Foreign Minister and his counterpart, the NSA and his counterpart. And finally, we got the agreement that we got earlier this week, which is that patrolling is going to resume. Now, what the nitty-gritties of that, we don't quite know, but the very fact that they got it, they announced it, and within a day or two of that, we've had the first bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, the first in 5 years. I think it's significant. I think it's an ode really to Indian diplomacy, to patience, to really saying that, look, China is not an easy country to deal with. And I go back to the old Pranab Mukherjee adage, you don't get to choose your neighbors, you get to choose your friends, but your neighbors are your neighbors and you've got to deal with them. And India has a tough neighborhood. You've got Pakistan on the one side, you've got a much bigger, more menacing China in the north. And this was this event that had happened in Galwan, and the incidence of Galwan was the biggest challenge in India's neighborhood policy in God knows the last 2-3 decades. And to stick it out and say that, look, this is a core interest for us and we're not going to budge. There was a lot of pressure, not just from the Chinese. There was pressure from the Americans, there was pressure from domestically, even from business, for example. I mean, the CEA, the Chief Economic Advisor, had said so in his report before the budget that, look, we should welcome Chinese investment. But to hold on and to say that unless you resolve this, it's what the Foreign Minister said, we are not in a normal relationship. We can only get back to a normal relationship if you address the border, and the border has to be fixed. Then we can get to a normal relationship. So I think that was a big plus. Certainly.
Yeah, but you would also admit or accept, we have to accept that going back to pre-Galwan does not fix things for us. It just perhaps mends the tear just a bit. The relationships are torn till the time this entire LAC issue is settled. And we know very well that the PLA does not want that to settle. The other thing, Rahul, if we stay in the China space before we expand, is that we know we can't trust the Chinese. This Hindi Chini bhai bhai is just an adage. They are going to go after that five-finger format, and Xi Jinping is actually pressed for time. Is this the domestic compulsions that made China to agree, the economic hardship that they're going through internally?
Anand, it's a very interesting point because everyone talks about the trust factor. Everyone is sort of focusing on this word, trust. At the end of the day, I don't think diplomacy works around trust, okay? Because how do you measure trust? How do we trust somebody? Through intent. Intent, I think, is more dictated by interests. So if interests have begun to converge, then things like trust and the other intangibles sort of fade into the background. Look at America and look at China, for example. The trust between the two countries is perhaps down at the level of someone's rolled down socks, okay? But the interests do converge a lot. And therefore, you have such volumes of trade between the two and interdependencies, to the point where, to be honest, the United States, not that I'm saying that they need to fight our battles, etc., they sit so much on the fence when it comes to China and India. So I think let's now look at the basic factor. Are the interests converging, as you're suggesting, or the circumstances forcing us in the convergence of circumstances? Yes, I think that is the question we have to look at. What has brought Xi back to the table? What has brought Xi back to the table is a slightly underperforming Chinese economy by their standards. Now, Xi gets legitimacy from a nicely working economy where he can constantly tell the people that, look, we are raising our game to the point where we're going to overtake the United States as the biggest economy in the world, this, that, the other. But we've seen that whether it is a glut in the housing market or whether there is debt which is mounting, even individual personal debt is mounting to unacceptable proportions. There is a definite slowing of manufacturing in China. All these factors, inflation, etc., all of them have begun to chip away. I won't say that they have in any way deflated Xi, but chip away at his legitimacy in the eyes of the people. And he realizes that precious resources can't be squandered in eyeball to eyeball confrontations at the icy heights. So perhaps maybe I should start the process, not that it might even result or fructify into anything dramatic, but let me at least start the process, loosely a de-escalation. So I'm not committing so many resources. In India, it's in India's interest. 90% of our economy is leveraged China way. It is the #1 trading partner for us. Nothing can get off the ground, quite frankly. And that's where Zach was saying that, look, economy itself, industry itself is telling Modi, okay, maybe we need to relook at the manner in which we have framed the conversation with China. Can it not be sort of, can the boundary and other issues be sort of boxed on the side so we can continue trade, etc.? I mean, I was looking at the statistics, the number of people traveling, just tourists traveling between China and India has fallen by 85% in the last 2 years. I mean, that's a huge number of people who have sort of started.
But I'll tell you,
I think interests are converging. Trust, I don't think that's a factor at all.
But there is also another aspect that if the Indian business community is going to look at that, where can I source things cheap and it works for me to work with China, irrespective of us having border issues, I don't know, I'm not able to settle with that. As an individual, I don't understand the broader sense per se, but I feel that you cannot go ahead and trade with a nation that uses economy to subvert you and to also then subjugate you, then mounts the pressure on the borders, and there you don't have anything because you've got this dependence on it. Now, this is something that we should have consciously worked towards, but everybody has their own thought process there. But the other
takes time.
Yeah, no, not just time. I think there is aspect of, I think from the time we started doing this RCMP, the commercial RCEP.
Yeah.
Now, Jan 2019, we walked out of it.
Yeah, which was a good thing.
Yeah, and no,
look at what's happening with
no,
Thailand
Jan
and the
2020. That was around the time that we walked out of it. December 2019, Jan 2020, and then April they attacked. So the correlation is drawn more with India walking out of RCEP than anything else. But the larger argument is that RCEP killed the manufacturing ecosystem in India, the SMEs altogether.
No, and look at the Thai economy right now, crumbling. Two other economies are facing problems, Japan, Korea. Some of these economies are not exactly where they should be because Chinese goods in the RCEP zone are flooding the market.
And they're undercutting, and then they're flooding the market at rates which are abysmal. You can't match those rates. But my point is that, Zaka, somewhere, I know we're digressing a bit, but somewhere it also reflects on India Inc., which is not ready to go ahead and go back to manufacturing and also source at a slightly more higher rate and in the short term bear the brunt of it. And they still are leaning on going back to pulling things from China.
But look, there are two parts to it. One is that, look, if manufacturing, there are two parts to it. Well, manufacturing, setting up at scale is not an easy thing to do because of, inherent legacy issues. The number of clearances that you need to get even today to establish a factory is far higher. It runs into hundreds. Labor. we don't have skilled labor like the Chinese do or like the Vietnamese do, and that again is a huge cost. And ultimately, cost will get translated to the consumer, right? Ultimately, the consumer will have to pay. It's not like the industry is going to pay that cost.
Yeah, I agree. But shouldn't India Inc. put pressure on the government of the day to actually work on these aspects more than trying to tell them, listen, keep the border issue aside, let's start trading with China. I'm just parking it there.
Anyway, so
Yeah.
that's, I think we're
we're digressing, I know.
I'll come
So,
back to the
yeah.
fundamental thing which you raised at the top of the show, which is that, look, India today, I think, finds itself in a diplomatic sweet spot. It is perhaps one of the few countries in the world which is in neither camp.
Yeah.
It's certainly not in the US camp, even though it's part of an arrangement like the Quad, which is clearly, I mean, the very intent of Quad is to keep an eye on China to ensure that the Indo-Pacific is free and safe, etc. And at the same time, India is also part of arrangements like the BRICS and SCO. So, we are moving very quickly. I don't want to use these terms very loosely, but we're really going back to a sort of Cold War-ish phase. Now, why do I say that? Because there are two distinct camps in the world today. One is, of course, the US-led world order, which is NATO, its European partners, led, of course, by America. And then you have Russia and China, who fundamentally, and Rahul was talking about interests, Russia and China fundamentally have an interest in changing the current world order. Their interests are not served with a US-led world order.
Correct.
Right? India is one of the few countries which is trying to get the best of both worlds. It wants a US-led world order. That's beneficial to us. All of the stuff that the markets and things like that. That is something that we want fundamentally. But at the same time, we don't want to alienate Russia. Our defense relationship is so dependent on Russia, now increasingly the oil relationship as well. And with China, the whole manufacturing piece. So I think the diplomatic sweet spot is that, look, we are in neither camp, and yet we are in both camps. So
Yeah, but how would you see Dr. Jaishankar making this statement where he says that Russia has never tried to undermine our sovereignty? But that doesn't hold true for a China or for a US. Now, in this case, the last 3-4 years have seen perhaps the biggest leaps that have been taken in Indo-US equations. And then you have this game that the Five Eyes are playing, trying to say that you listen to me and you come and visit only me and I give you a state welcome and a state, you don't go to Moscow, you don't dare do that. And this is how I'll screw you. Now, how do I trust someone like this, who says that you have to be totally beholden to me? Where does that work? And if you were to see globally, more nations have been undermined by America.
That's why
than
BRICS
the
is
Russia-China
expanding.
bloc.
That's why BRICS is expanding, because a large number of people have seen the weaponization of sanctions by the United States. It was Iran first, now it's Russia. There are several other countries that have faced them in different. India, when we tested our nuclear weapon, the Canadians, others, Japanese, etc. today who are part of our Quad, 2 of them went ahead and sanctioned us. I agree, as you say, that there is right now the danger that we might sort of go back into that sort of pincers of 2 blocks.
Yeah, bipolar kind
Exactly.
of an equation.
So BRICS now, I think, if all these members come in, and remember there are also US allies like Thailand, etc., who want to get in there. Now, as I argued in my piece, that will only make BRICS less of a Chinese-led arrangement, articulating Chinese and perhaps to some extent the Russian agenda. It'll make it a more diverse body where a large number of other countries will also get a ability to shape the agenda and truly make it a multipolar global south representing body, which will tell the West that, look, you have to also pay attention to our needs. And a more responsive West at the end of the day is good for the globe.
No, see, this hegemony thing, how does it, see, it all boils down to economics. I think, forget the war and all
so
of that.
the point I was just, really one line. So the point I'm making is that the United States has also realized the limitations of its flexing muscle and trying to dominate through its agenda or through other means, other partners and other players in the world. So I think they've realized that if we think that we can sort of push anyone into the corner, it's not going to work. Look at Putin. I mean, actually the BRICS, the real story, the BRICS is Putin, who has been able to tell the West, I'm sorry, but I'm actually not friendless. Look at the number of guys
No, I think
women
a lot of them, I
friends
think, are
that I have.
gravitating towards Putin or towards BRICS, not because of what Vladimir Putin stands for, but because there is a
Yeah,
Bharat
exactly.
there is a China there, and of course what the US has been doing. At the end of the day, it's all economics, gentlemen. The fact is, can you have just one nation have the unlimited,
Run of the world.
run of the road to print currency like they do, and they've put the whole world under debt. $6 trillion of that currency floating. You can't even de-dollarize. Now, why do you think more nations are talking about de-dollar? One of the crux was not just deep tech, but de-dollarization.
So
Nations want to
weaponization of
trade,
sanctions,
trading
trade,
directly.
exactly, yeah.
Now, when you say we are in a diplomatic sweet spot, that's not a position that lasts for long. But how are we going to capitalize on it? Final word on that. How are we going to capitalize on? How do you see things moving on from
I
here?
want to just add a word of caution. De-dollarization is great to talk about, but 89% of the world's trade happens in the dollar. And that's not going to change overnight. I mean, you can bring it down by a notch or two, but it's not going to suddenly become 50%. And that's primarily because the biggest commodities in the world, oil, for example, or any of your raw materials, iron, steel, cement, copper, everything is traded in the international markets in the dollar, and that's not going to change. You can have individual trading arrangements, which might make a bit of a drop in the ocean, but really that's not going to change. Also, I think fundamentally, and I know where you're coming from, the Khalistan issue has been a big irritant in the relationship. India can afford to, kick Canada where it hurts. It doesn't really matter because it's $8.5 billion of trade. India cannot afford to do that with the United States. That's just the reality of the world that we're living in today. Having said that, I think I go back to the fundamental point that I made. It is in India's interests to have a US-led world order for the foreseeable future. India does not want a China-led or a Russia-led world order. That's not in our interests. Yes, we want multipolarity, but the world order, the existing mechanisms, whether it's trade, economic, or diplomacy, it suits us. And we want this to continue for the next 30 years because this is our rise.
I think somewhere on the larger part, from 89%, if that scaled down to about 60-65%, everybody on the table will be a little more, confident and comfortable based on how the world order is moving. It's when it moves into the high 80s, high 90s, the impact of the US and the influence of the American dollar, that's where I think it's making a lot of people uncomfortable. And if it comes down to 60-65%, perhaps we'll be in a better place. But at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, it's all about economics. It all boils down to the money and who holds that power. Does it work to our advantage? We'll have to see how the coin turns out. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, it's closer home. What's happening in Maharashtra, seat sharing, Congress, BJP, the regional satraps,